Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to another exciting edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. I would like to deal with something that you see little bits and pieces in the media, not usually the mainstream media, because we have to have lots of stories about celebrities getting their pictures of their rear ends, or celebrities, wanting to become, a different gender and that sort of thing, or sports scores and things like that. That seems to be what a lot of people are really interested in nowadays, or at least that's what the media thinks the average person is interested in. But there's a topic that a lot of people really don't have a grasp of, and that is where we are going, where the future is going to take us. The near future. I'm not talking about way, Star Trek style, 23rd century and that sort of thing. I'm talking about where we're going to be in maybe 2030 to 2040. And the reason why I want to bring this up is not to do some sort of, those tabloid things that come out with, around the beginning of the year, they have these predictions for 2015, 2016, 2017, and that sort of thing. But what I would rather do is deal with profound changes that are expected to take place, not through looking through a crystal ball, but by looking at trends that have already started and where they seem to be taking us. And what I'd like to deal with is technology. There's a lot of issues out there, geopolitical politics and that sort of thing, and we could deal with. But I think technology and the changes that are going to come in the next 20 or 30 years are going to signify a change in humanity that we've never, ever experienced. We're going to see more change sociologically, politically, technologically, in the next few decades than we have seen in the last few millennium. Okay? It's going to bring into question, what is a human? What is even a soul? These are going to be questions ultimately that most of us are going to face. I hope most of us face it. I hope most of my listening audience is still around in 2030 and 2040. But what I want to also emphasize right now, before I go on, is this is not going to be necessarily a prediction of some sort of dark, dystopian future, although we very well might be heading that way. Nor is it going to be some sort of analysis that leads us into this grand utopia where we all sit around in, some sort of Greek togas or robes from the golden age of Athens and so forth, and we can just philosophize and contemplate all the wonders of creation while having all of our needs met for us. Instead, I think it's going to be somewhat of a blend. Now, I hope it's going to be I hope we veer closer to the utopia than the dystopia. But a lot is going to depend on where humanity is and where it wants to go. How informed we are, and how much we let our intellect and maybe even our spirituality hold the upper hand versus greed and an idea of, basically a hedonism that could come in such an era. And so I think ultimately we need to start with things that are going on now. And, let's just look. Well, first of all, let's just say, where were we? And I'm going to start with robotics. Okay. I also want to deal with, biotechnology and aspects of how it's going to change humanity. However, we can start with robotics first. And what I'd like to do is go back to 1985. There's this wonderful scene, I think it was 1985, wasn't it, that the first Terminator movie came out with. Now, robots, when I say robots, people think of these hydraulic metal creations, very similar to maybe on Star Wars, R2-D2 and CP-30, in which they're not really humanoid. I mean, they have a lot of intelligence and so forth, and they do basic skills, but they don't look like us whatsoever. Now, the one movie I remember, maybe it was the first one. No, it wouldn't be the first one. I think Westworld was the first one, but where you have robots that actually look and act human. And in most people's memories, that's the first Terminator. And I remember in Terminator where there's a scene towards the end when they're in the steel plant and the Terminator's looking for his intended victims in there. And he looks around and sees the robots of that era doing basic work. And he kind of gets this look, you gotta get this idea that he's analyzing, well, is this great granddaddy or something like that? Just the arms that move an object from point A to point B in the assembly line. Now that's one style of robot. Now, of course, we get to the point of Terminator, and we're talking something that looks like us and moves like us. Now, the one thing I will bring up is that technology is going towards a direction that artificial beings will not walk around like the robots of the 1950s, or maybe when you were a kid, you got some cardboard boxes and pretended to be a robot. They will instead look and feel and act as we do. The artificial intelligence will expand. It's been expanding. If you look at Moore's law, even though there's some indication it may be slowing down, it's still exponential growth. That things are getting smaller, more compact, but ultimately more efficient. And we're at a stage where we're wondering, will the artificial intelligence finally get to this point where it can feel, it can be self-aware? I don't know, but I think at some point it will be very similar to the way we think and maybe even the way we feel. The thing is that with fiber optics and so forth and technology similar to it, this is, you're going to be able to make muscle tissue, or what will function as muscle tissue for these robots. And that's going to change things profoundly in our society. Everything. It's going to change. It's going to change the way people work, the way they think about life in general, what a sentient being is. It's even going to change the way we think about sex. Yes, you do realize that one of the first uses of robots will be for sexual pleasure. Now, the thing is, that reminds me back of Westworld. That was, Roman world that was implied there in that movie. A good movie, actually. Most people have never actually seen it. It was around 1970, 71 with Yul Brynner in it. And I think it gives an idea of where humans really would take robotics if they could make the robots look human. It's a vacation resort and that sort of thing. But go ahead and watch it. Anyway, what I'd like to say though is there's several different reasons why we're going this direction when it comes to robots. And the reason why we're seeing more robots in the workplace. In fact, this could actually be a major change in the way we work because of cost, how much it costs employers to have a real live employee, as well as the aging population. See, this is a problem. In all the developed world, people's birth rates have plummeted. Okay? They're in a free fall. And if you get countries such as Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Southern Europe, more socially conservative, at least when it comes to European standards, and religious than Northern Europe. their birth rate has plummeted. I just saw a recent article in Bloomberg, and it's just really gone down. A lot of it has to do with economics, such as in Greece, people moving in, with their parents or not leaving their parents' apartment. And so it's very difficult for them to go out and get married and just start bringing kids into the world. But the thing is, even in the areas where the economy is still relatively good, the birth rate has gone down. People wait longer to have children. There's a propaganda out there. People watch film and so forth. And it seems, the average TV show or chick flick or something like that shows a woman's or man, the couple, they start settling down when they look like they're in their mid-30s or approaching 40, usually. You don't have films usually that have young woman, 22 years of age, getting married, and starting a family. So popular entertainment has a huge effect on people's attitudes. People start thinking, even though a generation ago most women started their families when they were in their early 20s, now there's a perception that you wait until you're, closer to 30. Or, in many parts of Europe, you wait till you're in your late 30s to start thinking about, maybe you should have a kid. And it usually turns into a kid if you're still able to have children, because, of course, fertility declines after your mid-20s. Now, the thing is that with a lower birth rate, you're going to have an aging population. All right? Now, combine this, I'm going to come back to the aging population in just a moment, combine this with the way that corporations feel about getting to the bottom line. You have a situation in which, you hear about the minimum wage, and I could deal with a whole show on minimum wage, but let's just say I can understand both sides to minimum wage. From a more liberal standpoint, there's this sense of, it's not fair that these employees are being paid so little you can't even really survive. And that's true. If you're getting minimum wage, how are you going to start a family? How are you going to support a family that already exists if you've got all the other expenses? At that, most people get minimum wage don't own their own homes, but they still have to deal with rent and so forth. And of course, people on the left will say, if these people are so poor and they're having to go on food stamps and other government assistance, ultimately the government, through the taxpayers, is subsidizing the corporations. Well, that's true. Does the corporation care? Not really. Their bottom line as a corporate entity, I'm not talking about individuals you may know that are CEOs of a corporation who may be the most generous people, go to church, give to the poor, that sort of thing. But as an entity, as a corporate entity, a corporation thinks of nothing more than to maximize profits. It's not there to be a charitable organization. It's not there to preserve the heritage and culture of a community for which it may have arisen from. It is there to make money. And so if these, in the past, a lot of corporations have moved out of the United States and Europe and gone to third world nations and set up their operations because, the people in the developed countries, they kind of expected that if they went to work and put in 8 hours a day, that they should be able to survive on that. Well, that didn't seem to conform to what the corporation desired. And so if they could go somewhere else and put people to work for 25 cents an hour sewing shoes, whereas the employee in the United States might have demanded $15 or $20 an hour, then bottom line, you're going to go there. And especially when during the Clinton administration, when all these trade deals were made that made it so much easier for companies to go over to other countries, such as China, manufacture goods and ship them back to the United States, pretty much duty-free, without, very big tariffs, then that really decimated a lot of the middle class. Not just the workers directly involved, but the people that depended on those workers for the foundation, the monetary foundation in their communities. Now, the thing is, those countries, such as China, are developing and will develop more and more. So what's the next step when these people start demanding more money? The next step is automation and robotics. All right? So you got two things going here. Corporations who really don't want to pay their workers any more than they can get away with paying them. And at the same time, you have an aging population, which means that you're going to have less available young people, especially to work these kind of entry jobs or jobs that are considered lower skill. And when you have those things come together, you're having a huge demand for the development of artificial beings who will do the work for us. Now, I will have to say this though. In Japan, their birth rate is so low, and of course they don't want immigration. They want to keep their nation homogenous. They want to keep their culture, totally Japanese. Okay, so you can argue one way or another, whether that's the right thing to do, but that is their decision. So they're getting less and less and less children. And so they're going to have a large number of old people. So they're working a lot on robotics in order that you have robots that look, act, feel like we do, who will then take care of their elderly population as caregivers, because there's not enough people who want to take the job as a caregiver in their society. And, at the same time, you have a lot of research and development on robotics by the U.S. Government through DARPA and so forth. Now, the difference, I had Noel Sharkey, professor of artificial intelligence from Sheffield, and he was on a couple of weeks ago, and he pointed out that you've got this really interesting reality taking place in which, let's say America, you've got various corporations that are part of like the military industrial complex, and they're competing with each other to develop better and better like autonomous drones and robots and so forth for the use of the defense industry. At the same time, you've got countries that are competing with each other. You've got China, Russia, the United States, and other nations that are looking at the future and realizing the future is not in human soldiers and pilots, but the future is in autonomous weapons. Because, face it, let's say you have a situation where you have the best, in the future, you have the best fighter pilot ever in the best plane ever. And he is going up against a target, and suddenly he gets met with, 1,000 drones that have been programmed to take out any airplane that fits the configuration of the enemy. All right? I don't care if you're the Israeli Air Force. Those guys are really awesome when it comes to their training and their skills. But if you have enough of these autonomous weapons coming at you, you can't win if you're swarmed by them. And the same would be true for aircraft carriers and so forth. All these countries are going to be competing with each other to come up with better and better. It's the new, in the old days, it was an arms race. Who had the best nukes? Who had the best delivery systems? Who had the best airplanes? But now it's turning into who's going to have the best weaponry that is autonomous, that thinks, that can be programmed, yes, but maybe you have a situation where you have to develop something in which you target, you put in the goals and you leave it from there. Okay? Again, we go back to Terminator. Mid-1980s, you had these robotic airplanes, these drones that were going around, and I guess they're programmed to kill humans. And, in 1985, that seemed pretty awesome for a science fiction concept. But now we're in science fact, okay? So we're going to see a lot more use of the military application. So we have two areas where robots are being designed. One is to replace humans. Okay, those are the ones that we're going to wind up with that are going to be like the androids of science fiction. That, you're walking down the street, you see a robot, you see someone pushing a baby carriage. That could very well be an autonomous nanny. She's not real, but she looks real. All right. And you won't be able to tell the difference. At the same time, the military is going to be producing these things, which there will be an overlap. There will be an overlap in which the technology that various militaries around the world come up with is going to overlap with the technology that corporations are coming up with. So, it's going to lead to a change in the way things happen in this country. And, I'm going to bring up Robert Reich. Remember him from the Clinton administration, Secretary of Labor, I believe? And you can go to his website at robertreich.org. I know some of you are probably going, wait. He was part of a liberal Democrat administration. I'm not listening now. You know what? I don't mind quoting liberals, conservatives, libertarians. I'll quote a communist if they come up with something that is legitimate, an observation that is based on reality. And he has some good stuff when it comes to this coming age that's coming up in around 2030 and so forth. And he has an article on his blog, February 2nd, 2015, dealing with the scraps economy. And he's saying that more and more of our work is going to be done by robots. Okay? Companies are going to have these because, you know what? A robot doesn't need to have time off to go have a baby. A robot doesn't need to have time off because they happen to be having a personal crisis at home or they're sick. The worst that can happen is they might break down, but then they can be fixed. The companies are going to see robots as being a cheap way to still produce the items for the consumer. Now, of course, this does imply that there will be consumers with money out there to be able to buy the products. But I think sometimes when people are rushing forward, they may not think about that fact. It's just like the U.S. economy has been stagnant, for instance, when it comes to worker wages for the past 30 years. That's right. If you take a look at true inflation and combine that with worker wages, it's been stagnant. In fact, I've seen some indications that it's been on the decline. But the thing is, I don't think many of our corporations think the way that Henry Ford did, pay your workers enough that they can go out and buy your products. Now it's just bottom line. The thing is that in this new economy, that, some projections, there was an article in the Business Insider UK edition that I recently read that expecting that 1/3 of jobs by 2025 will no longer exist. And much of that is due to automation. That's right. 1/3 will not exist. And AOL/Jobs, September 25th, recently said that by 2030, that could be 1/2 of all jobs. And we're not just talking about those assembly line jobs, okay? Everyone just kind of thinks, oh, it's assembly line jobs. That's just part of the past anyway. I mean, most of those jobs have been sent over to China from the United States and Europe. You know what? I don't think there's any job that's immune from being replaced. Heck, you could probably replace most of our congressmen just since many of them seem to be psychopaths anyway, just go ahead and program your robot to be a psychopath that will do whatever its corporate sponsor wants it to do. Anyway, the thing is, though, that a lot of these jobs are disappearing. And by the way, before anyone starts thinking, well, I guess I'll have to train to be someone that fixes robots. Have you ever thought about the fact that you might be able to make robots that are capable of fixing other robots? Okay? I mean, everyone seems to think that, well, there's going to be someone there that's going to be needed to do the job of fixing and repair and maybe even production. But I don't see any indication scientifically that it would be impossible for robots to function without people. You could program to where they don't need people. That's kind of scary. I'll get to that in a few moments. However, when it comes to this, when it comes to robotics, a lot of jobs are going to disappear. And we are ultimately going to face a future in which, not too far from now, in which you're going to have to show a lot of creativity and intelligence in order to really function in this whole new world as it's evolving. So therefore, the thing is that, I'm not trying to say that, oh my gosh, just give up, the future is bad, but it is going to change. And if you're, in the old days, when you had low-skill workers, those low-skill workers, as long as they had a good work ethic, could still make a living for themselves and in many cases a family. That is not going to be the case in the future because you won't need the low-skill workers. So what are you going to do with them? I'm just wondering. I think I have my own theories as to what the solution to that will be from various, elite and so forth, and basically just occupy them with, reality TV and sports and, designer clothes and all these kinds of things. Take their mind away from settling down, having families. In that way, you solve the problem in a few generations. They disappear. Now, the thing is that who's going to be considered low skill? Nowadays we might think of someone with a low IQ, and so forth, and, they're really the only job they can do is very menial labor. But in the future, maybe people will be considered low skill unless they're very exceptional. And we'll get into how that could change in just a moment. Now, when it comes to robots, though, you're going to have them as co-workers. You're going to have them as competitors. You may also have them as companions. Now, the thing is, you may think, now, who is going to want a robot companion? Well, first of all, think about what it would be like to have a robot assistant. Just a few years ago, everyone was really into these, what were they called? Palm Pilots or something like that. Pull them out. You could look at your schedule for the next month. And, if you're one of those people that tends to have a problem with organizing yourself, these were fantastic. The thing is, how would you like to have an assistant who knows how to schedule everything instantaneously, can tell you what's going on? The ultimate personal apprentice. All right, I say apprentice because they may someday take your job from you. But the thing is, you're going to have a situation in which people are going to have companionship there. Like I said before, maybe you'll have to get used to the idea of childcare, especially very young childcare. You won't have to take your kids to the daycare center. You program an artificial nanny who will take care of your kids and protect them. And heck, go a step further. Maybe you could have yourself a robotic wife or husband. As a technology goes on, take a look at the way people interact with each other now. They sit around at a table. You get a bunch of friends get together and they pull out their iPhones and start scrolling around. How many, you walk around and you could go into a social setting where people are supposed to be interacting with one another and they're interacting on their iPhone, seeing, basically when I see someone working on an iPhone at the same time they're in a conversation, they're basically saying the person they're having the conversation with is less interesting and exciting than whatever they can find scrolling around their iPhone. We're becoming more socially isolated. In Japan, a lot of guys have given up on relationships. In fact, they even have applications where you can have a virtual girlfriend. There's men that go on dates with their virtual girlfriend, who's essentially an app on their iPhone. And if we start getting robotics to where, it's not just an app, but it's an actual entity. Okay, it's not made out of plastic, it's made out of fiber and so forth that, again, looks, feels, acts in every way as another human being. Even program in, if you want variety, you could even go in and have the gender or facial characteristics or whatever altered. Okay, this is the ultimate in durability of a product. The thing is, you're probably thinking, well, what about if a woman wants an artificial husband because she can't find anyone out there because people are so disconnected from one another? How's she going to have kids? Well, I guess there's always sperm banks. Those will still exist. And you'll be able to go in and be able to have you're going to be able to genetically modify your kids. I'm going to get into genetic modification in just a moment. Just give me 1 second. The thing is that you're thinking, well, what about a guy? What's he going to do? Okay, he can't go to a sperm bank. Well, there's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of evidence as well as speculation that in the very near future we will have artificial wombs. So a guy won't even need a woman to still have his family. He could have his artificial wife or wives, and he'll be able to, the only thing he'll have to do is just go get an egg cell. Maybe, who knows, by that time maybe the Chinese will have cornered that market too. But you just, you'd select the perfect donor, female donor, you do artificial insemination, and then, just like an IVF treatment, you put it into artificial womb, come back 9 months later and pick up your baby. Okay? I still think human beings are still going to want that. Now, this leads me into another area that I think is really interesting. Oh, by the way, before people start thinking, where do you get your information? There's a lot of stuff out there that's talking about this change in the way, humans are going to interact in 2030 to 2040. Now, one of the things I'd really suggest you look at, if you get a chance, is a publication turned out for the intelligence community in the United States, but it's online. And it's called Global Trends 2030. And if you look that up, you're going to find some very interesting information. Some of it's a little scary because it talks about, people are going to be moving away more and more and more from rural areas. Rural areas, even in the United States, are dying. You look at places like Iowa, Wyoming, so forth. Young people just movie about the country person, boy or girl, who moves to the big city. However, in the past, you had a situation in which you had a birth rate in those areas that could keep pace with the exodus. There was always, if you had 4 kids, maybe 2 of them liked the life in their small community, and they stay. And they continue in that community, which allows it to have a financial base. However, that's not the case anymore. With mass communications, it reaches everyone. We've set a situation in which the norm, the perceived sociological, psychological norm is 2 kids, that's it. And many people, that means 1 kid or no kids, whether because they chose that way or infertility. And so these communities, as again, you get a steady stream of the young people graduating from high school and moving on, these communities are dying. But you're going to wind up, according to 2030, the global trends, you're going to wind up with mega cities. all right? Megalopolises that will be tens of millions of people, okay? And this will exist all over the world, with rural areas dying out. And this will create situations that will, on one hand, be a destabilizing factor. On another, it may create some very interesting economic dimensions for people. But I don't want to get into that so much. The Global Trends 2030 also points out that people are going to have way more connection to technology. And we may, in the future, be in a situation in which that technology merges with us. That's right. Maybe a way to be able to deal with having a competition from robotics and artificial intelligence is to merge with the machines. And that'll be little by little. Now, of course, there's a lot of people that think about this idea that, well, you'll be able to take someone's brain out and place it into a synthetic body, and you got virtual immortality. And, you take everything, way beyond the Bruce Jenner getting turned into a woman situation. If you're able to do that, you'll be able to choose what race, what size, what gender you are. And maybe it'll be interchangeable. It'll be you, it'll be your brain, but it will be in a different apparatus. It won't be in a human body. And if you ask people a few years ago, because I've done this with younger people, I've said how many people would go for that. And maybe 10 years ago, out of a group of 30, maybe one person would raise their hand and say, hey, that sounds kind of cool. But now when you do that, you wind up in a situation in which you get a sizable number of people thinking, yeah, I'd go for that. Because we're getting more familiar with technology. We're getting to the point where, people share the most intimate details about themselves with each other. I mean, on Facebook, for instance, people give information that they never would have considered public knowledge in the past. They tell where they live. They show you pictures of their kids. They tell about what they had for lunch. They tell you everything. We're getting into kind of this narcissistic, voyeuristic society anyway. Well, take it a little bit further. Maybe, there's some predictions that our technology will allow us to kind of merge, not just in the machine, but also in some sort of cloud mechanism by which our thoughts and memories and ideas can be shared. It's almost like this Hindu version, the final step of your spiritual evolution is to merge into the great oneness. Well, the great oneness may be able to be created with technology. Think about what that's going to be like. You'll be able to, it's going to be like the Borg on Star Trek, where you'll be able to know each other's thoughts and interrelate with them. And that stuff's being predicted by by a lot of futurists. Again, not the ones that are being fanciful. Everyone goes, yeah, well, they predicted flying cars. You know what? We have the technology for flying cars, and we've had the technology for moon bases and stuff like that for years. It's just that no one cares to say, let's just go ahead and integrate this into our infrastructure, or to pay the money to set up moon bases. Okay? The profit's not there. It's not seen yet. Well, the thing is, when it comes to this kind of thing, the profit is definitely there, and the technology is developing, if it's not already here, and that will lead people to do it. Okay? It's not something that's going to change. It's going to be at the personal level. The personal will become public with these kinds of technologies. Now, going back to this idea of how people will actually deal with this, well, one technique, aside from the fact that there's a lot of people, not just in transhumanist circles, but also just regular scientists, that feel that in the future, the technology will start this way. Now, first of all, we already have artificial things, artificial limbs and so forth. Of course, with all the wars, you have a need to satisfy the desire of soldiers to have maybe a new leg put on or a new arm. And not just like in the old days where it just looked like a leg or arm or something that if you put it on a certain way, you'd be able to walk, maybe with a cane or something. But I mean functional legs and arms. And the technology is soon going to be here where you're going to be able to interconnect the nervous tissue with the synthetic tissue, and you're going to be able to have arms and legs and so forth that are going to allow you to, they're going to be indistinguishable. You can still stub your toe. It still will hurt, but it won't be your toe. It won't be your leg. It'll be attached. And the thing is, at first, that'll be used for people that are missing arms and legs for one reason or another, or born with some sort of birth defect. The step will come in later that it will become something that people will desire, just like they desire, women go in for breast implants. You'll go in and get, perfectly healthy person will just go in and get new legs and arms put on. Think about how that's going to affect the way you see each, human beings. Let's say your wife has decided that she's going to go fully artificial. How are you going to interact with, is that going to change the way you interact with her? If the only thing biological left of her is, her brain. If we go, if you go to the next step. This is going to be quite interesting. But we will reach that point at some stage. I don't think by 2030 we'll get that far, but we will start getting into the artificial legs and arms for prosthetics and so forth that will function just as a regular arm and leg. The one area we're going to get into, and I think it's really interesting, I've never quoted Tyra Banks before in my articles, and so forth. But I think what's really fascinating nowadays is that the application for this stuff is going to be it's going to be really profound in the sense that she claims in the Wall Street Journal article that was published, what's the date on this here? July 7th, 2014, that, models will be robots. Think about that. That's going to be interesting. She also, predicts too that going in and having cosmetic surgery will be just like going to the store. Again, we have an aging population. Maybe if you're 70, you want to look like you're 20. Maybe, just like that could be where we're heading. There too, that's going to create some profound changes in the way we interact with one another. What if at the same time, now this is just a what if, and I'll come back to Tyra Banks in just a moment, but what if our biotechnology lets us live for, instead of just, living good until you're in your 90s, but extends that. And either through genetic manipulation, nanotechnology, those little robots that work on you from the inside out, they work at the cellular level. Face it, our DNA, even when you're looking at a 95-year-old person, they still have the same DNA, essentially, as when they were 25. The secret that has to be unlocked by scientists is how to reverse that DNA and to do it for the entire body. And nanotechnology could do that if you have robots that are the size of a human cell that could be programmed to go in and change all of the, those portions of the DNA that are associated with aging and send you backwards, kind of like that movie Benjamin Buttons, except you wouldn't reach infant age and then die. Okay, it would be that it could be programmed to, maybe you liked it when you were 30. You go back to when you were 30. But irregardless, maybe you have a way of changing everything, but the looks are still there. Well, you have cosmetic surgery. You can look young. You feel young. Your physiology is young. How's that going to change the way that we marry and stuff? It could create a situation where someone could be, dating their great-great-granddaughter. You got enough changes there in the when it comes to the DNA. I mean, you're not really related that much to a great-great-granddaughter. But the thing is that both people would look about the same age. That's going to create some major differences, isn't it? If human beings still want to go that way. Now, the thing that Banks puts in too is that in the very near future, and she's right, not just about the, models being robots and so forth, is the idea that we're going to be able to genetically redesign our children. You'll be able to choose eye color. In fact, she makes the comment that dark brown eyes will become exotic because many people will choose to have their children with blue or green eyes. I mean, take a look at Japan. All of their very, very, very popular anime. It's like, Japanese features blended in with European. You don't think Japanese would choose that their children have blonde, they still look Japanese, but they'd be blonde with green eyes or something like that. Like maybe their favorite anime character. I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people from like the Middle East and so forth where blue eyes they exist in the population, but they're a distinct minority where, these people will say, "Oh, I love blue eyes. I had my aunt has blue eyes. I would definitely go in and have my children modified to where they would have blue eyes." And then if you're talking about, DNA manipulation, the only thing you would do is take an egg cell, fertilize it with a sperm cell, and be able to determine what changes you want to make. And if you change it early enough, that will be part of the germline. Okay? Racial distinctions would probably become a thing of the past in the sense that you would have people mixing and matching. Now, of course, you would have more than just two parents. You'd have whoever donated this characteristic and this characteristic would theoretically also be your relatives. Think about that sociological implication there. Maybe Heather will have two mommies, and two daddies at the same time, biologically. And if you think about nanotechnology, again, going back to Bruce Jenner, nowadays when someone has sex reassignment, depending on how far they go, it's still a surgical method mixed with hormones. If you have nanotechnology that can alter a person's DNA, well, just maybe a guy goes in, has his DNA reprogrammed by the nanobots to be XY. And, human body takes about 7 years to replace all of its elements. Then maybe in 7 years, he's a fully functional woman. Or a woman becomes a fully functional man. Not just cosmetically, but in every respect. Which is kind of weird when you think about a woman could store some of her egg cells, go get turned into a man, in which she's producing sperm cells, and be able to get herself pregnant. I mean, it's possible. I mean, we're already talking about the idea that I read in a science magazine that the prediction would be like in about 15 years, again, we're talking about 2030, that 2 women or 2 men will be able to, one of them can take one of their stem cells and have it converted to the opposite sex of what their sexual partner is. So a woman would be able to get another woman pregnant. Now, of course, this will be a laboratory procedure. Now, I think that'll come in much sooner than being able to go in and getting nano treatment and then waiting for everything to just metamorphosize. But that is definitely possible. I mean, the scientists have already been able to take a stem cell and turn it into a sperm cell. Okay, so the thing is that it's just the next step to be able to modify it to where it's functional as an egg or sperm cell when it was actually taken from a person from different. Now, genetic engineering. I remember I watched a presentation from a bioethicist named Gregory Stock. And his prediction is that in the next 100 years, people are this is going to be standard procedure where you will go in and you will have your DNA engineered. People nowadays talk about designer babies, like, oh my gosh, designer babies. And then you actually start talking to them like, well, would you do it if you had, for instance, diabetes? I know women that have diabetes who have decided not to have children because they don't want to pass the type 1 diabetes on to their children. But this technology, even at the simplest level, you could just, fertilize several eggs and find out which one does not carry genetics that would pass on diabetes. And then this person could have a child and not worry about their children or their grandchildren developing diabetes. So this would open up a lot of really wonderful doors. But, at first it might be used for really extreme cases of genetic illness. But then it's going to be used for everything else. Oh, well, all the girls in my family have a small breast. Let's modify the DNA so she has large breast. All the guys in my family are short and bald. Well, let's modify the DNA to where the children have a full head of the males will have a full head of hair and be tall. Before, you had to go in and you had to have someone donate. If, you wanted that. If you had some sort of genetic illness, you'd have to have someone else come in and donate an egg or sperm, depending on who had the genetic illness in a couple. And that would change in the future. You'll be able to take a man and woman that could be, both of them could be short and have bad eyesight and have diabetes, but they would be able to produce a bunch of eggs, and then the scientists would be able to figure out which one has none of those characteristics. And then that would be the one that would be implanted in the womb. Okay, but that's the easy stuff. The next is going to be hair color, IQ. The Chinese, was reading about a Chinese research facility that they're trying to figure out what DNA patterns exist in highly gifted people. By the way, I've also read that people that are highly gifted also have DNA that is associated with higher longevity. You hear about people that drink and smoke and they live to be 100. Well, that's because they're blessed with good DNA. But usually that's connected also with higher intelligence. But anyway, you find those patterns, and their idea is that in the future, in near future, you'll be able to choose which one will give you the best child. So a couple can go in, they can choose the very best of the children. Now, of course, a lot of people will still be stuck on this idea of the romanticism or whatever of, well, I'll take what I get and I'll love and so forth. But I guarantee, if a woman is single and she goes into a fertility clinic, she's not saying, just give me whatever. She may feel that I just want a baby. That's all I want. I don't care about its looks. I don't care about anything else. I just want a baby. She goes in and all of a sudden she's looking through the catalog, and as well as I do, she's going to be going, oh wow, this guy here is athletic. He's got a good education and seems to be a stable man. Okay, I'll take him. Okay, that's the way they look. They're not going to just say, just give me whatever. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen when we have more DNA manipulation out there. And, again, when it comes to this idea that we have too many old people right now and not enough young, then you're going to have a lot more research in keeping people younger longer. Well, and I'm talking about the ones that already exist. I'm not talking about, genetically modifying our children to where they live to be 200 and they still look 25 when they are 200. Okay? I'm talking about being able to do interventions that will enable an older person who might be 90 years old to have the same physical capabilities as a 50-year-old. Okay? This is being worked on. Right now, because a lot of people have decided not to have kids, in the 1970s and 1980s and so forth, now we have what's called elderly orphans. Who's going to take care of all the elderly orphans of this next generation? All right? It's one thing if you've got a family and you're 80 years old, if you need some sort of help. And I'm not just talking about nursing home. I'm talking about psychologically how you feel about life if you're 80 years old and you have nobody. Well, that is going to be a major problem, and we're going to be wondering what to do with people. But the thing is, if you can do interventions that will enable people to work, then, when they're 80 and 85, they're not having to worry about, retiring 20 years earlier and just sitting around. You'll be able to keep them working. Keep them working the whole time. Keep them contributing. And, they'll feel better and be able to sustain themselves. Of course, maybe they, I'm saying that, it's probably not a good idea to choose to be childless. All right. But a lot of people, they can't help it. They're infertile or whatever. Now, the idea that we have when it comes to what this world's going to look like in 2040, a world in which, what if we go towards a hedonistic? Everything I've mentioned so far could be used to make life better for people. All right? Except, I don't know how willing society will be if everything's done by robots to take care of people. I mean, are we all going to be on welfare? Are we all going to be given a standard wage by which we still play economics? Where everyone's given a certain amount of money and they go out and buy the products that are made by the robots. Then they come home and another robot makes your meal and so forth. I mean, that can be considered a dystopia, like the cartoon Wall-E. Most people don't think about that as being dystopian, but it is a dystopian cartoon. Everyone's fat and, lazy because robots do all the work for them. I think that was also an element in the movie Dune at the beginning where they were talking about people turning to robots and then things went wrong in the past. However, the thing is, what if we enter an age where people become hedonistic? I mean, I was mentioning this to someone just the other day. We look at the internet now. Oh my gosh, I caught my kid on, a porn site. Well, you're going to have interactive computer systems in which it's going to be as if you're in with other people, but it'll feel the same way. You'll put a headset on, you'll enter a virtual world, and you'll interact with people in that way. You may not be interacting with people around you, your neighbors and so forth, and your colleagues, but you will be interacting virtually. The other thing is, think about, the idea that what's that going to do when it comes to religion, sociology, psychology, when everyone can pretty much live out whatever they want to with their robot. Or maybe we'll get to a stage where we also not just have robots, but we also have artificial people, where you just put them all together and they come with a patent versus being someone who was born of a mother and father. Would they be human? Would they deserve equality if they're mostly synthetic? They're put together by a laboratory that has a patent that sells them? Think about that for the future. This could be very interesting. Sometimes you wonder, was this the way it was back in Noah's day? You do have that scripture in the Bible that says Jesus would return when the days were like they were in Noah's day. And most people just assume people were just being naughty in Noah's day. How do we know? How do we know that Jesus was not actually being literal? Okay, that he wasn't actually telling the truth, that he would come back when things were exactly like they were then. Who knows? It's a thought. But anyway, we are going to have changes in the future. We are going to have a different way of looking at life. It's going to change us profoundly, sociologically, spiritually, psychologically, economically. And there's nothing people can do about that except to adapt where they can and to keep their humanity and their ethics